Cale stood at the edge of the crumbling city, his eyes scanning the vast, lifeless landscape. The earth, once teeming with vibrant life and the sound of bustling cities, was now a shadow of what it had been. The skies, once a brilliant blue, were now thick with ash and smoke, remnants of a long-forgotten war that had wiped out humanity. He was the last of his kind, the last human left in a galaxy that no longer cared about Earth's existence. For years, Cale had wandered alone, searching for answers to the questions that haunted him. Why had humanity been destroyed? Why was he the only one left? Was there any hope for the human race, or had they simply been forgotten by the stars? As Cale walked through the desolate ruins of the once great city, his boots crunching on the broken concrete and glass, he couldn't help but feel a deep loneliness settling in his chest. The weight of the silence was overwhelming, as if the entire world had abandoned him. He had explored every corner of the earth, searching for any sign of life, but all he had found were the remains of a species that had vanished without a trace. Cale had spent countless days sifting through the ruins of old cities, trying to understand what had happened, but it was all a blur. The records were gone, the history lost to the ages. All that remained were fragments of humanity's once proud civilization. His only companions were the ghosts of the past. He had found old books, dusty and yellowed with age, but they told him nothing new. He had encountered strange alien relics, left behind by visitors from other worlds, but they offered no answers. His every discovery seemed to lead him in circles, each piece of the puzzle slipping through his fingers like sand. But Cale could not give up. He couldn't let the story of humanity end like this. He wasn't sure if he was searching for a way to bring humanity back, or simply for closure, but he couldn't stop. It was as if something deep inside him pushed him forward, even though he had no idea where he was headed. One day, while scavenging through a ruined building, Cale found something that made his heart skip a beat. In the wreckage of a long-abandoned library, he uncovered an ancient piece of technology, a small metallic device covered in strange symbols. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. As he picked it up, he felt a surge of energy coursing through his fingers, a strange warmth that seemed to connect him to something far greater than himself. His breath caught in his throat as he realized that this was no ordinary artifact. This was a key, a link to something that might hold the answers he had been searching for. Cale stared at the device, his mind racing. Could this be the beginning of the answers he so desperately needed? As he stood there, holding the device in his hand, Cale felt an unexpected presence in the air, a shift in the atmosphere. He wasn't alone. For the first time in years, he could feel it. Something was out there, something watching him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he turned around, his heart pounding in his chest. But all he saw was the endless horizon, stretching out before him like an ocean of emptiness. He couldn't shake the feeling, though. Something was coming, something beyond his understanding. He tightened his grip on the device, his eyes scanning the ruins once more. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew this moment was crucial. The universe had a way of throwing unexpected things his way, and this discovery was no different. He could feel that his search was about to take a new turn. Whatever was coming for him, he was ready. He had to be. The last human in the galaxy couldn't afford to let anything stand in his way. His journey was just beginning. Cale had barely taken a step forward when the air around him seemed to shift, the weight of something unseen pressing against him. His fingers tightened around the strange device he had found, his senses on high alert. The silence of the wasteland felt too thick now, as if the world itself was holding its breath. His gaze flicked toward the horizon, searching for any sign of movement, but the landscape was as still as ever. Still, something was different. Then, it happened. From the sky, a sudden flash of light cut through the heavy clouds. Cale barely had time to react before a sleek alien ship came into view. It descended with a grace that seemed unnatural, its dark metallic surface gleaming in the dim light. The ship's shape was unlike anything Cale had ever seen, smooth, organic curves that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. It was beautiful, terrifying, and strange all at once. As the ship touched down with barely a sound, Cal's heart raced. Who was inside? Was this the sign he had been waiting for? Or was it another reminder of how alone he truly was? The hatch of the ship opened slowly, revealing a figure cloaked in shadow. Cal's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped into the light. She was tall, with an air of authority that instantly commanded respect. Her skin shimmered with an ethereal quality, a pale silver glow that caught the light in an almost hypnotic way. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the surroundings before locking onto Cal. He stood frozen, unable to look away from her piercing gaze. There was something in her eyes, something ancient and knowing, as if she had seen the universe unravel and had lived through eons of time. Cal. Her voice was soft, but carried a weight that made the air around him tremble. It was as if she had known his name long before he had ever heard it. "You've been waiting, haven't you?" Cal blinked, taken aback by her words. How did she know his name? Who was she? His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. The last human on Earth. And now, here was this mysterious figure, appearing out of nowhere. Was she a survivor from another planet? A being from a far-off galaxy? His thoughts swirled in confusion, but he remained rooted to the spot, unable to move. "I've heard the stories," she continued, her voice carrying a tone of both wisdom and sadness, "of humanity's greatness, of your people's rise to power and their tragic fall. But I know the truth. You are not the last human, Cal. You are the key to what comes next." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Cal couldn't speak. She was telling him something he had never even considered. He had always thought of himself as the last, a lone survivor drifting through a dead world. But if what she said was true, if humanity wasn't truly gone, then what did it mean for him? What was the future she spoke of? The woman stepped closer, her gaze softening for a brief moment. "I am Lyra," she said, her name like a melody on the wind. "And I've come for you, Cal. There is much for you to learn, and together, we will rebuild what was lost." Cal felt a strange pull toward her, as if an invisible force was drawing him in. Her presence was overwhelming, yet oddly comforting. She didn't look like the enemy. In fact, there was something about her that felt familiar, as if in some distant corner of his mind, he had always known she would come. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He had so many questions, so many doubts. Who was she really? Why had she come for him? But before he could voice his thoughts, Lyra turned toward him, a slight smile touching her lips. "You've been searching for answers, haven't you?" she asked. "I can give them to you, but first, you must trust me." Cal hesitated. Trust wasn't something he gave easily, not after all the years of solitude, not after seeing the galaxy fall apart around him. But there was something in Lyra's eyes, a sincerity that made his heart race with a feeling he hadn't experienced in so long. Hope. "All right," Cal said finally, his voice low but resolute. "I'll trust you." With that, Lyra's smile deepened, and she nodded. "Then come with me, Cal. Together, we will begin the journey to restore what has been lost. The galaxy is waiting for you." As she led him toward the ship, Cal couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope. Inside the sleek ship, Cal marveled at the advanced technology that surrounded him. The walls were smooth, with glowing symbols and soft lights that pulsed gently in the dim interior. The air was rich with the scent of something unfamiliar, like a mixture of cool metal and sweet, distant flowers. Lyra led him through the corridors, her movements graceful and confident. It was clear that she was no stranger to this vessel, and it only deepened Cal's curiosity. She hadn't told him much about where they were going or why, but there was something undeniable in the way she spoke to him, something that made Cal trust her, even as the weight of the unknown pressed on his shoulders. As they reached the central control room, Lyra gestured for Cal to sit in a chair by the large glowing console. The room was bathed in soft blue light, with large windows that gave him a glimpse of the vast, star-filled void outside. He had never seen so many stars in one place. The galaxy stretched out before him, endless and beautiful, a reminder of how small and insignificant Earth had seemed compared to the universe. And yet, as Cal sat there, looking out into the infinite space, he couldn't help but feel that he was meant to be here, that somehow this was where he was always supposed to be. Lyra sat across from him, her eyes thoughtful as she watched him take in the surroundings. "You're probably wondering where we're going," she said, breaking the silence. Cale nodded, his curiosity growing with every passing moment. He had so many questions, so many things he needed to understand. "I'm taking you to a place where you can learn the truth, Cale. A place that will answer everything you've been searching for." Cale leaned forward, his heart racing. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra's expression softened, and for a brief moment, she seemed almost sad. "It's a sanctuary of sorts," she said. "A place where the knowledge of the ancient races is kept. It's hidden, far from the prying eyes of the galaxy. The answers you seek are there, answers that can change everything." Cal's mind raced. He had always dreamed of finding something like this, something that would reveal the secrets of humanity's past and the reason behind their destruction. But the more Lyra spoke, the more he realized that his search for answers had only just begun. "And what do you want from me?" Cale asked, his voice steady despite the questions swirling inside him. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I want you to help me unlock the secrets of this place," she said. "There's a power there, Cale. A power that's been dormant for eons. Only a human, only you, can awaken it." Cal's heart skipped a beat. Only a human. Could he really be the one? The last human in the galaxy, chosen to unlock some ancient power. It felt like a dream, too strange to be real. And yet, something deep inside him urged him to believe her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something greater. "You'll understand more when we get there," Lyra added, sensing his confusion. "For now, just trust me." The ship hummed to life as Lyra began to activate the controls. Cale watched, fascinated by the smoothness with which she worked. The ship seemed to respond to her touch, almost as if it were alive. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of being Lyra really was. She wasn't like any human he had ever known. There was something alien about her, something otherworldly. Yet, for all her mystery, she felt more familiar than anything else in Cal's life. As if in some strange way, their fates were entwined. The ship surged forward, leaving Earth's atmosphere behind. Cal's heart beat faster as they soared deeper into space, passing by distant stars and planets that looked like tiny specks in the vastness of the universe. He felt as though he were being drawn into something far larger than himself, something that he could never have imagined in his wildest dreams. As the ship traveled farther, Cale realized that his life would never be the same again. He was no longer just a survivor. He was part of something much bigger, something ancient and powerful. The journey was just beginning, and Cale knew that whatever lay ahead would change everything. But he also knew that he couldn't turn back now. He had been chosen, and his destiny was waiting for him among the stars. The journey through space seemed to stretch on forever, the stars passing by like distant, forgotten memories. Cale found himself lost in thought, the weight of everything that had happened settling heavily on his mind. Lyra had been silent for much of the journey, her focus on the controls as the ship glided through the void. Cale didn't mind. He needed time to process, to understand the enormity of what was unfolding before him. He had once believed he was the last human alive, the sole survivor of a broken world. But now, there was Lyra, an alien, a being from another world, and a promise of answers that seemed almost too incredible to believe. The ship finally slowed, and Cale's gaze snapped to the large windows once again. Ahead, A massive structure loomed in the distance, its silhouette dark against the vast backdrop of space. It was unlike anything Cal had ever seen. The shape was both elegant and imposing, a vast city of towering spires that seemed to rise from the very heart of a dying planet. The architecture was a blend of strange alien designs, with flowing lines and geometric shapes that defied conventional understanding. It was a place of ancient power, its energy radiating outward like a pulsating heartbeat. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. The sanctuary. Cal could hardly believe his eyes. They were approaching a world that had been forgotten by time, a place where the secrets of the galaxy's past were hidden. He felt a rush of excitement mixed with fear. This was the place he had been searching for. This was where everything would change. As the ship descended, Cal could see more clearly the extent of the sanctuary's magnificence. The landscape was vast, dotted with ruins of what appeared to be long-forgotten cities, their stone structures overgrown with thick vines and strange, glowing plants. There were no signs of life, but the planet felt alive in its own way, as if it were watching them, waiting for something. The ship touched down with barely a sound, and the hatch opened. Lyra stood up and turned to Cal, her expression serious. "Follow me," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. Cal stood and followed her, stepping out of the ship and onto the surface of the planet. The air was thick with an unfamiliar scent, a mixture of earth and something else, something ancient, as though the land itself was steeped in forgotten knowledge. The ground beneath their feet was smooth, like stone, but it seemed to shimmer faintly with an energy that Cal could feel deep in his bones. As they walked through the ruins, Cal couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The sanctuary was a place of mystery, its beauty marred only by the passage of time. The structures around them were impossibly intricate, covered in alien symbols and carvings that seemed to tell a story that had been lost to history. "Who built this place?" Cal asked, his voice filled with wonder. Lyra paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "The ancients," she said softly. "They were a race of beings far older than any civilization you've known. They were the ones who shaped the galaxy, who created the foundation for all that came after them. But they're gone now. Their knowledge and power remain, but only in places like this. This sanctuary is one of the last remnants of their existence." Cal's mind raced. The ancients, had they been the ones to create the galaxy, to bring about the rise and fall of civilizations? What had happened to them? And why had they left behind these powerful places, only to vanish without a trace? "I've brought you here because you are the key," Lyra continued, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Only a human can unlock the secrets hidden within these walls. Only you can awaken the power that sleeps here." The weight of her words settled over Cal like a heavy cloak. He was the key, but what did that really mean? What was this power, and why was it so important that it had been hidden away for so long? "Come," Lyra said, gesturing to a large structure ahead. It was unlike the others, standing taller and more imposing, its surface etched with glowing symbols that seemed to shift and change as they approached. "The answers you seek are inside." Cal took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. Whatever lay inside that structure, it would change everything. As they stepped into the shadow of the massive building, Cal felt a shiver run down his spine. This was no ordinary place. The air was thick with power, and he could sense the weight of history pressing down on him. The sanctuary held the secrets of the galaxy, and Cal was about to uncover them. The massive structure before Cal and Lyra loomed like a dark monolith, its surface shimmering with faint, shifting patterns of light. The air felt charged, as if the very atmosphere held its breath in anticipation. Cal couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to cross into a place far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The energy around them was palpable, an ancient force that thrummed under the surface of the world itself. Lyra led the way, her movements fluid and confident. She had been here before, Cale could tell. As they crossed the threshold of the building, the air grew cooler and the dim glow of their surroundings intensified. Inside, the walls were lined with strange carvings, their shapes unfamiliar and almost hypnotic. Some seemed to shift, as though they were alive, watching them, waiting for something. "This place is alive, isn't it?" Cale asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. Yes, the sanctuary was built on the core of the planet, and it's connected to the ancient energy that flows through it. It responds to those who enter, to those who are meant to be here. Cal's mind raced. This sanctuary, this place, wasn't just a structure. It was a living, breathing entity. It was as if the very ground beneath them had a consciousness of its own, its pulse beating in rhythm with their steps. As they walked deeper into the building, the carvings on the walls seemed to come alive, their intricate designs shifting and changing, revealing new symbols and messages with each step they took. Finally, they reached the heart of the sanctuary, a vast chamber at the center of the building. The floor was smooth and glossy, reflecting the dim light from above. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it rested a large, glowing crystal. The crystal pulsed with a soft, blue light, its surface covered in strange, swirling patterns. Cale could feel the power radiating from it, an energy that seemed to call to him, beckoning him closer. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice filled with reverence. "The source of the ancient's power." Cale stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the gravity of what was about to happen. His hand hovered just above the crystal, as if waiting for permission to touch it. But he wasn't sure if he was ready. What if this power was too much for him to handle? What if it changed him in ways he couldn't understand? Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "Don't be afraid, Cale. You were chosen for a reason. You're the only one who can awaken it." Taking a deep breath, Cale extended his hand and touched the surface of the crystal. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, as though 1,000 voices were speaking to him all at once. Images flashed in his mind, strange landscapes, distant stars, and civilizations long gone. He saw glimpses of the ancients, their towering forms moving with graceful power, shaping the galaxy with their will. He saw the destruction of his own people, the fall of humanity, and the darkness that had swept across the galaxy. But then there was something else, something brighter, a vision of hope, of a new beginning. The crystal seemed to pulse with life, its energy filling him, unlocking something deep within him that he didn't even know existed. It was as if he was connected to something far greater than himself, something ancient and eternal. Cale pulled his hand back, gasping for breath. His head was spinning, his mind overwhelmed by the flood of information. He staggered back, his legs weak beneath him, but Lyra was there to catch him, steadying him with a firm grip. What was that?" Cale asked, his voice trembling. Lyra's eyes were filled with understanding, a knowing look in them that Cale couldn't quite place. "That was the awakening," she said softly. "You've just unlocked the power of the ancients. It's yours now." Cale's mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had touched the crystal, and now he could feel it, the power coursing through him, the knowledge of the ancients embedded in his very soul. He had always believed that humanity was nothing more than a relic of the past, a species doomed to fade into obscurity. But now he realized that he was part of something far greater. The galaxy had not forgotten humanity. It had simply been waiting for the right moment for their return. "You were the last human," Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. "But now, you are the first of a new beginning." Cale stood there, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't just the last human. He was the key to the future. And with that realization, a sense of purpose filled him. The journey was far from over. It had only just begun. Kale stood in the heart of the sanctuary, his mind still reeling from the surge of energy he had just experienced. The power of the ancients was now within him, but he could hardly comprehend what that truly meant. His hand still tingled from where it had touched the crystal, and deep inside him, a quiet hum of energy resonated. It was as if his very blood had been infused with something ancient, something that had been waiting for him all along. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the crystal, a look of quiet satisfaction on her face. "You felt it, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Kale nodded slowly, still trying to process the flood of sensations. "I did. It was overwhelming. But I can still feel it. The power, it's in me now." Lyra smiled, her gaze turning to meet his. "It's always been inside of you, Kale. The ancients chose you long ago. You were never truly alone. They were waiting for you to awaken to your true purpose." Kale felt a sense of responsibility wash over him, but also something more, a call, a purpose he couldn't quite define. The knowledge of the ancients was not just about power. It was about something greater. The balance of the galaxy, the life force that connected all living things, the cosmic web that held everything together. He could sense it now, pulsing beneath the surface of everything. The galaxy was alive, and he was a part of it. But what was he supposed to do with all this power? What did the ancients want him to accomplish? He had been a lone survivor for so long, and now suddenly he was supposed to carry the weight of an entire galaxy on his shoulders. It was terrifying. "You still have questions," Lyra said, as if reading his thoughts. "And that's natural. But the answers are coming. The galaxy has a way of guiding those who are meant to lead. You will find your path. Trust the power inside you." Kale turned to look at her, still struggling to understand. "But what about the rest of humanity? I thought I was the last. Am I really the only one left?" Lyra's expression softened. "You are not the last, Kale. You are the first of a new chapter. The ancients foresaw a time when humanity would return to the galaxy, not as a forgotten relic, but as a force of change. You have the potential to revive humanity, to rebuild what was lost. But you cannot do it alone." Her words struck him like a lightning bolt. The weight of his new responsibility felt heavier than ever, but at the same time, a spark of hope ignited in his chest. He wasn't alone. Lyra, this alien being who had guided him here, was more than just a companion. She was a partner, someone who understood the vastness of what they were facing. "But where do we start?" Kale asked, his voice filled with determination. "How do we rebuild humanity? How do I bring my people back?" Lyra's smile deepened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "We start with the knowledge. The ancients didn't just build this sanctuary. They left behind the tools to restore balance to the galaxy. The first step is to unlock the archives, the library of knowledge hidden deep within this structure. The answers you seek are there. But be warned, Kale. The journey ahead will not be easy. There are forces in the galaxy who will stop at nothing to keep this power from being unleashed." Kale's heart raced. He wasn't sure what kind of enemies they might face, but one thing was clear. He had no choice but to press forward. His destiny, the future of humanity, and the fate of the galaxy itself were all tied to the choices he made now. There was no turning back. Lyra led the way through the sanctuary, her steps confident as she navigated the twisting corridors. The walls around them seemed to pulse with energy, responding to their presence. Every step Kale took felt heavier, as if the weight of the universe itself was pressing down on him. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the last human. He was the first of many, and it was time for humanity to reclaim its place in the galaxy. As they reached a hidden door, Lyra turned to Kale with a knowing look. "This is where it begins," she said softly. "Inside, you'll find the answers. Inside, you'll find your future." Kale nodded, taking a deep breath. The door opened, revealing a vast chamber filled with ancient data consoles and holographic screens. This was it. The knowledge he had been seeking was within his reach. The power of the ancients, the future of humanity. It was all about to unfold. The chamber was like nothing Cal had ever seen before. The walls stretched upward, disappearing into the shadows, while holographic displays floated in midair, showing images of distant stars and forgotten worlds. It was a treasure trove of knowledge, waiting for the right mind to unlock its secrets. As he stepped further into the room, his eyes were drawn to the central console, where rows of data panels hummed with energy. Lyra stood beside him, her expression unreadable, as if she knew that this was a turning point in their journey. "Here," Lyra said, her voice breaking the silence. "This is where you'll find the answers to everything. The ancients left behind their knowledge, their history, and the keys to the future. You need to learn what they wanted you to know." Cale nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep within him. He moved toward the central console and placed his hand on a glowing panel. Immediately, the room responded, lights flickering to life as the data screens displayed complex information in swirling patterns. It was overwhelming, but there was something strangely comforting about it. The more he focused, the more the information made sense, as if his mind was being guided by an invisible force. He wasn't just reading the data, he was absorbing it. The images on the screen shifted, showing a galaxy in turmoil, planets burning and civilizations falling into darkness. But among the chaos, Cal could see a glimmer of hope. Humanity, once thought to be extinct, was not gone. It had been scattered, hidden away for safekeeping, waiting for a time when it could rise again. This was the secret the ancients had protected, a plan for humanity's return, but it had to be executed carefully, with patience and precision. As the holographic images continued to shift, Cal's mind reeled. He had always believed humanity was lost, that his people were nothing more than a distant memory in the grand expanse of the universe. But this was something else. The ancients had not abandoned humanity. They had safeguarded it, hidden it away for a reason, and now Cal was the key to unlocking its future. "Lyra," Cal said, his voice trembling with awe. This plan. It's all in place. It's all here." Lyra stepped closer, her gaze sharp and focused. "Yes, it is. But not everything is as it seems. The ancients had to make hard choices, Cal. They created this plan to protect humanity, but they also knew that there would be enemies who would stop at nothing to prevent its success. There are those who will try to destroy the last hope for the galaxy." Cal turned to her, his heart racing. "Enemies? Who? What are we up against?" Lyra's eyes darkened. "There are ancient factions, beings who do not want humanity to return. They see your kind as a threat, something to be wiped out before it can rise again. You felt the stirrings of this power within you, Cal, but now you need to prepare yourself for what's coming. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and those who would see humanity's revival undone are watching." Cal's fists clenched, a wave of determination rising within him. He had never asked for this, but now that he knew the truth, there was no turning back. He couldn't let these enemies, whoever they were, destroy everything his people had once been. He had a purpose now. He had a duty. "We'll fight them," Cal said, his voice firm with resolve. "We'll do whatever it takes." Lyra gave him a small, approving smile. "I knew you would say that. But this fight will require more than just strength. You will need to unite allies, forge bonds with those who still believe in the hope of a new beginning. The ancients may have left their knowledge, but it's up to you to bring the galaxy together again." Cal absorbed her words, the magnitude of the task ahead slowly sinking in. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the future of his people, for the galaxy itself. The weight of it all was immense, but he wasn't alone. Lyra was by his side, and together, they would face whatever came next. As the last of the data screens faded into darkness, Cale felt the power within him surge again, more controlled now, more focused. He could feel the pulse of the galaxy, the lifeblood of the stars, the heartbeat of the universe. And with this power, he was no longer just a survivor. He was a leader, the first of many to come. The journey ahead would not be easy, but Cale was ready. He had no choice but to move forward. The galaxy's future depended on it. Cale stood on the edge of the ancient platform. The vast expanse of the galaxy spread out before him. He had never felt so small, yet so powerful at the same time. The stars sparkled like diamonds, distant and untouchable, yet within his reach now, as if the very cosmos were calling to him. He could hear the hum of energy that pulsed through the space around him, the remnants of the ancients' power and knowledge. It was overwhelming. And yet, somehow, Cale felt calm. It was his time. Beside him, Lyra watched quietly, her eyes scanning the stars. The journey had brought them this far, but they both knew the final step was yet to come. They had uncovered the secrets of the ancients, learned of the hidden humanity scattered across the galaxy, and discovered the threats that lay in wait. But none of it mattered if they couldn't unite the galaxy, if they couldn't bring humanity back from the brink of extinction. "You're ready," Lyra said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. She could see the change in Cale, the way his presence had shifted over the course of their journey. He wasn't the same man who had first touched the crystal in the sanctuary. He had become something more, something greater, but he still had doubts. "I don't feel ready," Cale admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "There's so much at stake. The power of the ancients is in my hands, but how do I wield it? How do I rebuild an entire civilization? And how do I fight these enemies who are determined to stop us?" Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch reassuring. "The power isn't something you control, Cale. It flows through you. You are the vessel, but it is the galaxy itself, the collective will of humanity and all life, that will guide you. You don't have to do it alone." He looked at her, taking in her words. They had been through so much together, and in Lyra, Cale had found not just a guide, but a true ally, someone who believed in him, even when he doubted himself. She had taught him that leadership wasn't about holding all the answers, but about making the right choices when the time came. And now, the time had come. The ancients' knowledge wasn't just about survival, Lyra continued. It was about balance. They believed in the unity of all life, humanity, the stars, the planets, the creatures. We cannot save humanity by conquering the galaxy. We save it by understanding our place in the grand scheme of things, by working together, not as rulers, but as equals. Cale nodded, a sense of clarity beginning to form in his mind. The galaxy wasn't just a battleground. It was a web, a network of interconnected lives and forces. He wasn't meant to be a conqueror. He was meant to be a leader who could unite disparate worlds and species, who could show them that together they could thrive once again. The knowledge he had gained from the ancients was not just about power. It was about understanding, about forging connections, and creating harmony. "Then what do we do now?" Cale asked, his voice stronger now, filled with purpose. Lyra smiled, her eyes glowing with pride. "Now we reach out. You have the power to communicate with those who are lost, those who still remember humanity, those who will answer your call. The first step is to reunite the scattered fragments of your people. Once humanity is whole again, then you can bring the rest of the galaxy into the fold." Cale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his responsibility settle within him. He had always thought of himself as the last human, the last survivor. But now he understood. He was not the last. He was the first of a new beginning, a leader who would bring humanity and the galaxy back into balance. As he activated the ancient communication system embedded in the platform, the stars before him began to shift, aligning in patterns that spoke of long-forgotten secrets. Slowly, a signal was sent out, a beacon to the scattered remnants of humanity. The message was simple, but powerful. "We are not alone. The time has come to rebuild. The stars above seemed to respond, as if answering his call. Kel could feel the energy of the galaxy shifting, the power of the ancients flowing through him once more. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be battles to fight, enemies to face, and challenges to overcome. But Kel was no longer afraid. He had found his purpose, and with Lyra by his side, he knew they could face anything the galaxy threw at them. As the signal spread, Kel smiled, knowing that the first chapter of a new era had just begun. The future of humanity and the galaxy itself was now in their hands, and together they would create a new dawn.